this video, we're going to take a look at the security features in Microsoft 365. A quick intro, my name is Nigel Stott. I'm a legal technology consultant with Baskerville Drummond. I've been working in the legal technology sector for around 20 years, and I've worked as head of IT and IT director at various law firms in the north. I work now as a virtual CTO and IT director, and also specialise in the implementation of Microsoft 365. If you need to contact me, my email address is at the bottom of the screen there. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is some of the security challenges we're seeing in law firms at the moment. So to start with, phishing emails. These are the form of emails that are designed primarily to capture your user login details. So a really good example of this, and again this is Microsoft 365 related, is an email that looks like it's from your help desk. You click on a link and it asks you to reset your password details by putting in your current username and password. Those details are captured and then used to gain access to your email and or Microsoft 365 account. The other thing that we are still seeing at the moment are data breaches. Data breaches can take many forms. It can be as simple as sending an email to the wrong person. There's various technologies that can be put in place to address this kind of thing, but we are still seeing that as one of the core reasons law firms have to make a report to the Information Commissioner's Office. Ransomware is an interesting one. It's becoming more prevalent. In fact, the CEO of the National Cyber Security Centre, Linda Cameron, recently said that what they're seeing is ransomware becoming more of an ecosystem whereby malicious actors can obtain ransomware as a service and get access to various ransomware variants and commodity listings for a one-off payment or a share of the profits. The other thing that we are starting to see is supply chain compromise. So, for example, this is where law firms may take all the adequate protections to protect their environment, but what they tend not to protect against is those suppliers that they trust. So, for example, if a law firm has a third-party software vendor, that vendor could have a new release of software that has already been infected with some malicious code. Other examples of supply chain compromise are website builders. So the website builder itself is infected and it redirects website visitors to malicious sites. Another good example is what we call a watering hole attack, and this works where, again, malicious actors identify a website that's frequented by users within a targeted law firm, and then that website is compromised to enable the distribution of malware. Just to touch on Microsoft 365 holistically for a second, what we're seeing around Microsoft 365 is that most firms have implemented Microsoft 365 in some form or other now. The typical journey we're seeing for a law firm is where they'll have an on-premise email system, and that is becoming end of life, so they take the decision to move their emails into the public cloud and run those on Exchange Online within the Microsoft 365 environment. Another example of how law firms adopt Microsoft 365, especially recently, is by adopting Microsoft Teams for video calls and collaboration with the increase in home working. So why would we use Microsoft 365 in the context of security? But I guess there's other areas that feed into this as well. So I think law firms have typically taken a third-party product approach when it comes to implementing technology. So this could be sometimes called the best of breed approach. But what we've tended to do historically in the legal sector is go out and buy products that specifically meet our requirements and then integrate those into other products we have within the firm. A few years ago, we used to be going out and buying mobile device management tools. I've seen before where we've gone out and bought email encryption tools and other types of products, and then integrated those with the systems the firm's already using. But the drawbacks of this is that approach means that these applications can be difficult to manage, and the integration piece can also be difficult, but it can also mean that things go wrong with the integration as well. So it does need a lot of care and attention. Whereas with Microsoft 365, all the Microsoft 365 product sets are tightly integrated together as standard. So we have less of those integration and management challenges. And essentially, Microsoft 365 is what I call an ecosystem. So depending on the license that a law firm holds, they will have access to some or all of these Microsoft 365 applications. Some of these you'll be very familiar with, so products such as OneDrive, Outlook, Teams. As I've mentioned before, many law firms are using Exchange. Some of the ones you might not be as familiar with are things like Power Apps, Power Automate, and also something called Project Cortex, which is an initiative that Microsoft are running around artificial intelligence and machine learning. But today what we're going to do is focus on the security tools that are available in Microsoft 365. So this might be useful if you are considering implementing Microsoft 365 and want to understand better what the security tools are that are available, or maybe you already have Microsoft 365 and want to know what tools you should be harnessing. Now, essentially, the security in Microsoft 365 is broken down into three separate areas. We have threat protection, though that is protecting ourselves against things like malware, viruses, links that come into the business. Device protection, which is essentially ensuring that we can protect things like smartphones and laptops and putting security mechanisms in place for those. And then we have general data security, so protecting the data that exists within the Microsoft 365 environment. That could be data in OneDrive, SharePoint, but that could also be email data as well. The first thing I'd like to talk about is Microsoft 365 Defender. Microsoft 365 Defender has 4 service components, but I think there's just 2 that are particularly significant for most firms. So when it comes to threat protection, there's Microsoft Defender for Office 365. And essentially, this is, in its purest form, a cloud-based email filtering tool. So it allows firms to protect themselves against things like malware and viruses by scanning emails that are coming into the business and that exist within the Exchange Online environment. If Microsoft Defender for Office 365 is scanning an email and detects something that it can't identify straight away, then it will use machine learning and analysis techniques to detect whether there's a malicious intent in the file or other content that is within that email. If there isn't any suspicious activity, it releases that message for delivery to the user's mailbox. The other main product in the Defender suite is Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So essentially this has the capability to protect devices and analyze the security profile of each of those devices within the firm. Now, this includes antivirus. So I think the important thing to remember is that there is a free version of Microsoft Defender that comes with new versions of Windows 10 and other Microsoft server operating systems. But Microsoft Defender for Endpoint takes things a step further. So it does the antivirus protection as well. But what it also does is it uses machine learning to access and scan devices that are on the network to look for unusual patterns of behavior and report on those as well. Microsoft Endpoint Manager has 2 components that are particularly interesting to law firms. They are Microsoft Intune, Windows Autopilot. There is a third product as well that comes under the device protection side of things, which is Microsoft Multi-Factor Authentication. But in relation to Microsoft Intune, essentially this is a product that allows you to apply some level of control over any devices within the firm. So you can set up specific policies to control applications within the business. So for example, if you want to prevent emails being sent from a specific email account to third parties outside of the firm, Intune will allow you to put in place a policy for that. On personal devices, it also lets you separate firm data from personal data on that device, so that can be protected separately. Windows Autopilot is great news for IT teams that have had a challenge deploying devices over the last year or so whilst people have been home working. So essentially, in its most basic form, this allows us to automatically set up and configure new devices. So if you need to send a new laptop to a new starter at the home address, you can send that to them, and when they switch it on, it will take them through a customized setup process that requires very little interaction from them. Microsoft Multi-Factor Authentication, I would say this is an absolute must for anybody that is using Microsoft 365. Historically, we've only relied on our usernames and passwords to gain access to systems, but what Microsoft Multi-Factor Authentication does is after I've entered my username and password, I'll then have an application installed on my iPhone or Android phone called the Microsoft Authenticator app, and that will ask me to verify who I am on there as well. So this is really good protection, especially for law firms that are using email that's been accessed via Microsoft 365. I think the final area that I want to look at is around data security. So there's various areas across Microsoft 365 that come into play when we look at data security. Just to start with, external file sharing. So one of the benefits of using Microsoft 365 is that we can use applications like OneDrive and SharePoint, and they give us convenience. You know, we can upload files to OneDrive, we can share those with third parties, but there's a lot of risks that come around that, and especially you know, if we've got fee earners within law firms that are sharing a number of files or folders, it can be really difficult to keep track of who shared what with who. So what we can do is around external file sharing, we can implement things like conditional access policies to determine who can access that data. Microsoft 365 also has a very detailed audit log, so we can tell what files have been shared and who they've been shared with. And we can also set up alerts. So if we want to know and be alerted whenever a certain file or a certain user shares a file externally, we can set up alerts to be warned of those as well. Data retention has been a hot topic since GDPR and the associated UK Data Protection Act of 2018. Again, with Microsoft 365, though, we need to be sure that we can retain data for a set period of time, but we also need a level of granularity around that. So if there's certain types of data, for example, email data, that we want to retain for a set period, but we want to do something slightly different with files that exist in SharePoint or OneDrive, then we need the flexibility to do that. And Microsoft allows us to do that within Microsoft 365. So we can use a combination of retention policies and what's known as retention labels to determine how long data should be retained across various Microsoft 365 applications, so Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams. If your business uses Yammer, it allows you that level of granularity in Yammer as well. Data loss prevention is a way of identifying sensitive information, so that could be anything from credit card details, medical records, other financial data. But what that allows us to do in data loss prevention is it allows us to apply data loss prevention or DLP policies. So we can identify that kind of data, we can monitor the data, and we can put in measures to protect that data as well. The way it does this is it uses a deep content analysis. So it isn't just simply doing a text scan of that data to determine what data is sensitive and needs to be protected by the DLP policies. It's using machine learning to really look at the data, the contents of any attachments, to identify that sensitive data as well. Auditing, Microsoft 365 contains some very granular and detailed auditing across all areas. So whether you're looking to determine who's viewed a particular file, whether an administrator has given themselves access to a specific mailbox, you may want to, again, coming back to external file share, and determine who has shared a file with whom, then the audit logs in Microsoft 365 provide you that very, very detailed, granular level of information. And then finally, eDiscovery. eDiscovery is again, a tool that allows you to perform a deep content search across all Microsoft 365 repositories. So, for example, this can be useful for things like subject access requests, or if a firm's involved in a litigation case, it's really useful for that kind of thing as well. What I would say is it probably isn't quite comparable to some of the eDiscovery tools that have been in the market for a long period of time, but it's certainly getting there. And it isn't just Microsoft 365 data that we can scan using eDiscovery. It allows us to upload data that doesn't reside in Microsoft 365 and analyze that data as well. So I hope that was useful. It was just a brief overview of the security features in Microsoft 365. But if you have any questions around these, then feel free to drop me an email at nigel@baskervilledrummond.com.